Welcome back to another episode of Real Chums, where chatting about movies feels like hanging out with friends. I'm your host, Marcel, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Danny.
This week, we are continuing our viewing of our favorite movies from a decade ago with Interstellar, directed by Christopher Nolan, written by Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan, starring Matthew McConaughey, Jessica Chastain, Anne Hathaway, Mackenzie Foy, and many more.
In this episode, we're going to go deep into the themes of this movie, why Tars is such a fun character, and the gripes we have with the character of Tom. But before we roll that intro, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.
Join in on the conversation on YouTube at Real Chums, where we discuss movie news, react to trailers, and so much more.
Let's roll that intro. Dude, it's been a while. For our listeners, Derick is now. We'll call you a legacy guest now.
Okay. All right.
We love having Derick on. You were on here when we did Princess Mononoke, which was a great episode, great discussion.
It was a really good episode.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a blast. And, you guys have now both been on my podcast. So, Marcel was on it way back. You're the legacy guest for me. And then Danny was just on recently talking about Black Hat. And
That's right.
So we were doing a bunch of episodes on my podcast about director's cuts and alternate cuts. We talked about the Michael Mann cut of Black Hat. So that was a lot of fun.
Which, can I say, what a great theme or segment of director's cuts.
Yes.
I love that. I saw it a couple of weeks ago when you announced it, and I was like, now I'm in the mood to go watch, which I've never seen, Kingdom of Heaven.
Yes.
Ridley Scott one, right? And
Mm-hmm.
which I hear his director's cut is superior than what we got, which I've never seen the director's cut. So that's one that I need to watch sometime.
It is phenomenal. It is, and that one I save it. It's the grand finale of this miniseries that I'm doing.
Oh, is it?
So,
okay,
yeah.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
We'll
okay.
have to, we will watch it and then listen to it. And
Yeah, definitely check it out.
So stay, listeners, if you're listening, be sure to check out his podcast so you don't miss out on that juicy goodness. But for today, we are going to be hopping into Interstellar. Now, Marcel has a question of the day.
Here's a question of the day. What is your favorite crying performance from any actor or actress?
Crying performance?
Yeah, because Matthew McConaughey's crying in this movie
is legendary.
hits me every time.
I was gonna say, can it be this movie? It's so good it became a meme.
Yeah, right?
Is that even a question? I mean, Derek just said, it became a meme. It's just legendary.
Okay, maybe outside of this one.
That's a good one. Most crying movies? I feel like I had a good, I could pull it. I just can't, I'm drawing a brain fart. There was another movie that I saw that recently that had a good crying movie. Now I'm trying to.
There's one that came to mind. Will Smith in The Pursuit of Happiness, right? When he's in the is it a bathroom, right? And they're banging on the door. That's a good one. That one hits every time. But yes, Matthew McConaughey's crying in here, just uncontrollable, unconsolable.
Unconsolable. There you go. That's word of the day.
How about I got one. It's minor spoiler for the end of the Planet of the Apes trilogy, the recent trilogy. But that single tear coming down Caesar's face.
Gosh, yes.
And Marcel, the orangutan, is crying too. That scene, oh man, that gets me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, I like that one. Good call.
I did. I'm doing some Googles, so this is not mine. But some of the people are saying, Forrest Gump.
Right. When what's her face dies and he's crying. Right.
Another Tom Hanks is some people in the last scene at the end of Captain Phillips, which it's been years since I watched Captain Phillips, but I thoroughly remember Captain Phillips having some pretty intense scenes.
I've never even seen Captain Phillips, if I'm being honest. I need to watch it.
You've never seen it? It's pretty phenomenal.
Okay.
I think
I think it's one of those underrated movies.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Maybe future
I think
episode.
people like slept on that one, but it's a great performance from Tom Hanks.
Anne Hathaway in Les Mis.
Oh my god, I don't know how I didn't think of that one, because I was going to bring up her performance in because she's so good in that and this, and so
that's right.
Like, and she won the Oscar for that crying scene, pretty much.
Yeah, for that crying scene. Yeah,
that's guys, we messed up.
There's some crying scenes though where like and I think that's one of them where there's a lot of saliva, right?
they're just wet.
It's just coming out
but
of
specifically
every
like the saliva, right? And I think that one's one of those where, which is a great performance. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, that's one of those.
Freaking limits.
All right, guys, that was a good one. Anyone? Another question of the day? Anyone? Okay.
Or it was a lie.
Yeah, I think it's a lie.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough question to top. That's
It was. Anyways, let's get into this. Derick, as our guest, let's have you give the synopsis for Interstellar.
All right. So Interstellar, starts with it's in the not too distant future, when the world's economy and resources and everything has kind of collapsed, but it's not a post-apocalypse like you would normally see. It's just kind of a boring post-apocalypse. And it centers on this guy, Cooper, who was one of the last pilots, who now he's just a farmer because everyone in this world is a farmer. And him and actually through mostly his daughter, Murph, whose name you will hear many times in this movie, start to discover weird anomalies in her room, which she calls a ghost. Tom is also there, her brother. He doesn't matter. Don't worry about him. So through these anomalies, they eventually come across this weird, secret underground base that ends up being NASA. And seemingly by coincidence or fate or something like that, NASA is telling them, hey, we're actually going to try and save the world by going into space. There's these planets that we found a wormhole. Someone put it there. We don't know who, some kind of fourth dimensional beings. We're going to go across to another galaxy and try to repopulate the world. There's already been a bunch of astronauts that have gone over there. So Matthew McConaughey Coop is his name, has to leave his kids behind with John Lithgow, their grandpa, and he goes off into the unknown with Anne Hathaway and Wes Bentley from the Hunger Games and the best character, Tars the Robot. So they go they go across and they go to a few different planets. One is a water world, no Kevin Costner, just horrible water mountains that displace time to an intense Hans Zimmer soundtrack. That's where Wes Bentley dies. They get off that planet. They're like, okay, cool. Let's go see Dr. Mann's planet. Dr. Mann is hyped up to be the greatest of all humans and the greatest of all the NASA scientists. Surprise, Matt Damon. He's actually the worst, though.
He is the worst.
And then he blows up their friend, who I haven't mentioned yet because there's a lot of characters. He gets blown up. They go chase him. He tries to steal their spaceship. Meanwhile, on Earth, all this other stuff is happening. Murph grew up into Jessica Chastain. She's trying to figure out the equation, but Michael Caine, who's kind of the grandmaster of all, turns out he was lying to him. He's also Anne Hathaway's dad. And it's a lot of this movie. So non-linear. And he...
Typical of Nolan.
Right? Like, this is like pretty straightforward for a Nolan movie, but still. He says this poem about 8,000 times. As they're escaping, Matt Damon blows up. They do this insane maneuver that is one of the coolest shots in movie history, where it's not possible, but it's necessary. They get on the spaceship. They shoot across the black hole. Coop sacrifices himself going into the black hole to submit the data back to Murph through a watch and time travel crazy antics that are way too complicated to go in here. But don't worry, he does it using a watch and Morse code and a tesseract. And she solves gravity, and he eventually gets back to her. But by then, she's old, and she's got her own family, and he's sad because she died, but he knew that she had a long life. Don't worry about Tom. She goes back. She's like, all right, go find Anne Hathaway. She's off on that planet. Who she had a crush on this guy. He went to this planet. that's a whole thing we'll probably get into. So he ends the movie. Him and his buddy Tars steal a spaceship and head off to go find Anne Hathaway. The end.
Perfect. I couldn't have summarized that any better.
I feel like you just changed our podcast. That was legendary. But we usually just go a quick synopsis, like trying to go for like 2-liners, right? I was
like, I don't know how to summarize this movie. I was like, we got to the part with the other astronaut. I was like, I didn't even bring him up. Oh man.
Oh yeah, there's another one there.
Right.
Great. I love it. So thank you. That was exactly what we were looking for. So
I want to kick us off because we're doing a whole month of movies that came out a decade ago, right, in 2014. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that this came out 2014.
Oh my gosh, it's like crazy.
I feel like it just really came out. And then rewatching it for the first time in a couple of years, I'm like, the VFX still hold up really great.
We will talk about this.
And we'll talk about that. But I want to ask, what was your first viewing like, if you remember? What's been your relationship with this movie since its release? I'll hand it over to you, Danny, and then Derick, I want to hear from you on that.
Okay, 2 things. One, I was like reviewing a video about Interstellar from a YouTuber that I really enjoyed called his name is Sven. He does This Guy Edits podcast, and in it there's a little post that's like someone like commented saying that they wish they'd seen it in theaters. And they're releasing it. They're re-releasing it for a 10-year anniversary in theaters. So if you haven't seen it in theaters, now is your chance. Don't miss out.
Yeah.
Because my experience was, this is the other thing I had was like, I wish I had taken notes from that experience. Because I do remember it being a very impactful experience coming out of the movie, thinking, because it was one of the first movies that I watched after the blip.
After your blip, right?
After my blip. So, Derick, if you don't understand, we are both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We had a mission for 2 years, and in that 2 years, we don't watch any sort of media, just because we're super busy helping, trying to talk to people about Jesus Christ. We call it the blip because we just there a lot of movies go past that we just don't realize. And so I came back. This is one of the first movies I watched, and one of the biggest things that I remember coming out was like just the spaceness of it, like all the space stuff that is in the movie was like, this is wild. Like I should have spent more time in physics class or whatever it is, and just thinking about like how that was like a movie I hadn't experienced before. I mean, I felt like there was a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoyed Matthew McConaughey, and cast. And I remember me and my homies talking about it a lot. I will say, though, I think shortly after, I do fully having this thing, remembering of like tapering my like likeness, my like enjoyment of the film like a lot, because there was like huge influx of people just like with every Nolan film, which I've talked about in the podcast before with Oppenheimer, that I have this like when a movie comes in that's really good, but there's also like and from a director that's also really great, and there's a huge hype, I tend to like back myself off because I don't want to be tainted and look through this rose-colored glasses. But Nolan specific films are hard because they're films that should not be watched one time. They're films that you have to watch like 15 times before you can fully like, not 15, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Fully in like
appreciate
the films. He makes films that are that are like in this essence of filmmaking that like not is forgotten, but is like different. He looks at filmmaking differently, which I appreciate. That's why people love him. That's why we all appreciate him. But it does make it hard, like initial feelings for me, and that's where I kind of landed.
Okay. Derick.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I actually missed in theaters, and I don't know why, really. Like, I remember being very excited for it and wanting to see it a lot. I'm a big Nolan fan, and especially, the one he did right, I guess the one right before this was Dark Knight Rises, but before that was Inception, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I saw that movie in theaters multiple times. I think it was because it was that, it was a weird period where I wasn't seeing a lot of things in theaters because I had worked at a movie theater from like 2007 to about 2013. And so I saw everything in a theater because I could just go for free. And then starting like 2017, 2018, I have my AMC pass, or movie pass, which became, then I got an AMC pass. But this was in that time period where I didn't have like the movie pass or AMC wasn't a thing yet. And I didn't work at the theater. So I just wasn't really going out to the movies as much as I would. So I missed it. And
going to movies is expensive. We understand.
It totally is. And I was also a broke recent college graduate around then. I think I had just moved out of my parents' house, so I was real broke. But I saw it like with my brother or something like that, maybe like a year or two after it came out. And I, just remember being like blown away. Like I was like, this is an incredible experience, just super moving, dramatic movie that I the whole time I was watching it, and I had the same feeling watching it now this time as I wish I had seen it on the big screen. I'm really glad to know that it's going to be coming back to theaters. I wasn't aware of that because I was like, it's the 10th anniversue. Let's do it.
I wanted to mention it.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I'm going to make sure and do it because I remember earlier this year when Dune 2 was coming out and they had that limited engagement where they were playing Tenet on a lot of the true IMAXs, and so I was like, Tenet's cool. I like Tenet, but like, why are we doing Tenet? Like, of all the Nolan movies, like that's the one I was least interested in watching on a big screen, So, yeah, but even on like a smaller screen, this was still the scope of it all is so immersive and impressive.
No, I'm glad you bring that up because both of you, because I think I watched this on IMAX, and I didn't see Inception, I didn't see Dark Knight Rises in IMAX, so this was like my first Nolan movie in IMAX, and it was just like it was incredible, just like the scale of it all, right? The black hole Gargantua just looked phenomenal on screen. The criticism, obviously, that I had and that I feel like everyone had for this movie was just like the sound mix, right? Oh. There were times where I was just like, what? Say that again? Can you repeat that?
Okay, so isn't it amazing that Matthew McConaughey could just like go throughout his scenes and just mumble his lines and it not get mixed properly and we just accept it?
And we accept it. And so like that was like the criticism. And for me, when I left the theater, I was like, man, the projectiness probably had that on way too high. No, it turns out like everyone had the same problem, right? Mm-hmm. And we've continued to see that since. I think it got better with Oppenheimer most recently. But
before it got worse with Tenet. Tenet is like, like what is anyone saying in that movie ever?
Yeah. But since then, I have a unique relationship with this movie because like I bought it on physical media, Danny. And when our first daughter was born in 2019, I think I've told you this. Like, she was like as a newborn, she's not sleeping, and so like my wife and I would just like spend the nights just watching everything. Like we watched all the Rocky movies, and this is one of the ones that I watched. And then, but like I watched then, and I watched in 2019. I think I saw this movie like 3 times because like I had a daughter, and it hit so much harder.
Marcel, there's a video out there of Marcel just on your phone hiding.
Oh no,
you just crying as hard as Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, the Matthew McConaughey meme. That's me just going, like no, I hate to be that guy, but like as a father, like
I don't think you should hate to be that.
But I'm gonna say, like as a father, this movie hits so much differently now than it did my first viewing. And like I love it. I had the criticisms. We'll talk about the whole monologue of love that Dr. Brand gives, but like it hits for me, and it's cheesy, it's corny, it's kind of interjected in a weird time during the movie, but I'm all for it. It's perfect cheese for me.
I think we should talk about it right now because I think Derick's great synopsis talking about forget about Tom. who cares about Tom? His love for his daughter. Don't get me wrong. Like so there's two quirks here. Like one, I do feel like I love the idea that like love and gravity. Okay, like are transcendental, or is that the right term?
Transdimensional.
Transdimensional. There you go.
Yeah.
That like it's his thing. But then Tom like it just is like a weird redheaded stepchild. He's the only one that actually sends message to his dad.
That's true.
But he also sequesters his family.
Yeah.
The house. I just think it's a really weird thing. It's just a weird situation with love. I just wanted to bring it up, but I do think we should talk about the love angle because I think it's worth it. Okay, let me ask the question: what is Tom's? I mean, Derick, I kind of get a sense you're in the same boat, but like, what's with your feelings with Tom and the relationship between the father and son with this film?
I'll kick this off real quick. We chatted about this a couple of weeks ago with, the importance of suspending disbelief in fiction, right?
Yes.
You have to, right? And I'm all for it. And also, listeners and viewers, like, if you're hoping we get into like the science of this, unless Derick is a physicist that we aren't aware of,
not at all.
This is not the podcast for that. Okay, we are just going to accept it as is, and maybe we'll touch on it, but this isn't it. But here's the thing: like, my biggest like plot hole, so to speak, or issue with this movie is that relationship with his name is Tom, right? I was just going to call him Chalamet, right? But like,
he is Chalamet before he turns into Casey Affleck.
Yeah, it's
little baby Timothy Chalamet. I forgot about that.
Yeah. I like, even when he wakes up,
when he's a jerk,
when he wakes up in the future and he just asks for Murph, it's like, dude, I don't know, maybe ask for your kids, ask for your like.
Tom's got to be dead.
Yeah, but like, he assumes that. What's her name? Murph is alive.
Touche.
Right? So like it's kind of jarring, like just the drastic relationship he has with the two. I have no doubt that he loves him, right? But it's very like that was like my biggest like of all the issues with this movie that people had.
Yeah. That's
my one biggest criticism.
Yeah, I think the way, and I was making fun of it. I think the way I took it is that, Tom is like, on one level he like knows Tom is okay. Like, he knows Tom is a little more self-reliant. Like, when he leaves, like, he's, the grandpa's like, oh yeah, like, Tom will be fine, but like, make things, and like, I think he knows that he's self-reliant and stuff like that. And I also think he's just like, like, I think maybe, Murph, he sees a lot more Murph, himself than Murph,
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's that, but it's also just like, it's the plot contrivance thing of like, you need to kind of have like one character. It's like the same thing as like on The Americans, how like after a certain season, like Henry went to like hockey camp or whatever, because like who's the son, and then Paige, who's the daughter, is like actually like finding everything out about her parents and how they're spies and stuff like that. And they're like, all right, we're gonna push the other kid over here. It's kind of like one of those things. It's like, there's not really enough room in this plot for him to be like Murph and also Tom. Like.
Yeah. I think Tom's only there so that he can go and try to deal with the fire, so that Murph can go back and like save the family and go to the room.
Yeah, because she's if Murph's an only child, she's sold that house years ago.
Yeah, that's very true, 100%. I even thought like, would it have been better to write Tom as like the nephew that like he took in right after like his siblings died? I don't know. Maybe that could have been a route to go with it.
Right.
But what I do like about Tom, right, and that is that Tom is the personification of the things that Cooper does not like about Earth, right? Like the farming, right? He personifies these issues that, and not that that Cooper has criticisms or issues with his son, but for us as viewers, that's who Tom is for us. He represents the farming element of it all. In Cooper's words, the being a caregiver rather than an explorer, a pioneer, right? Okay. And so from that aspect, I see the characterization of it all. But on screen, it's jarring. That's all it is.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because and I think because you watched it multiple times in a scenario where like you're like paying a lot of attention to it. That again, it's one of those things where like the Nolan films have so many. You know, you've got to watch it so many times just to get to a level of like understanding why some things are there, right? And but I appreciate that this level because it's love throughout the whole film is like a weird it's portrayed differently at different times. And I think, you know, like we think about the grandfather and his like he wants a hot dog at a baseball game and how it later, you know, Cooper's love for exploration and for being an astronaut because he was an astronaut. He was, you know, like a pilot, some kind of, you know, situation that he lost and he thought he would never have again, and discovering it. And part of that drives him to want to accept this mission, even though he knows he cannot return.
Mm.
And
he thinks he can.
Yeah. Well, yes, but part of it to a degree, like if you're going to space on a mission that is exploring something, there's also a level of knowing that you may not come back.
Yeah, but I like Cooper is confident he's coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
True.
Like he is, and like he's adamant because Professor Brand is going to figure out the gravity equation, right, and then he's going to come back, and that's why I think that whole finding out, which I totally forget. I always forget that Professor Brand had like undermined them with the gravity equation that he lied on that. That's why that reaction is so powerful because that's when he realizes, oh no, like this is a one-way trip, right?
Right.
I do wish they'd spend a little more time on that.
Okay.
But we'll get to there. Sorry. Derick, do you have any thoughts on the love portion?
Yeah, I mean, I really thought all that stuff is interesting, you know, and like you say, they do kind of get through a lot of it really quick, and it is something that, you know, you with all these different character relationships and stuff. So it's something that on a second viewing you might catch things that, you know, went over your head, you know, like, you know, Brant being in love with you know, the young Brant, Anne Hathaway being in love with Edmonds, who is the planet that they want to go to at first. And, you know, her talk, and a lot of people, I one of the common criticisms of this movie that I hear that I really don't agree with is that, oh yeah, like it's so scientifically accurate until the end, and then it becomes like about love. I'm like, no, that comes out of nowhere. I'm like, that's not out of nowhere. That's in the whole movie. Like that's pretty much Anne Hathaway's driving thing in the entire movie. And if, you know, and that, you know, that's something that, you know, she, like the connection that Coop has back on Earth is to his kids. You know, she has this connection out to the, you know, wanting to go to the stars because she wants to reconnect with this guy that she was in love with. We don't get much information on that relationship, but we know that it's real, and it's something Coop picks up very quickly, and it kind of shows how he can really read people or robots sometimes, and because he kind of gets the information from TARS, where he's like, bad poop work like slick, and but I love that she's like going with this goal, and he's like, okay, no, we've got to be like scientific. You know, because you want to go there because of your love, we're going to go to this other planet which ends up being a really bad decision. That's the decision that leads to Wes Bentley's death and to them losing 23 years because that planet was obviously the wrong choice. If they had initially gone to Edmund's planet and done what Anne Hathaway did and said, love is something quantifiable. Love is something like she almost treats it like scientific. It's this thing that can be reached across dimensions. And then that ends up being, you know, at the end of the movie, what the ultimate key to unlock everything is that this love that he has for Murph that reaches across time and space and dimensions, and he's able to send her that message, and love, you know, ends up being what saves us all, but not in a way that you would really expect. It's a much more, it's like fate causing itself because of the like these connections that we've built in life. It's really interesting because it's a theme that gets explored a lot, but never like this really.
I love that. I want to. That leads me to a question I don't have written on our show notes for you guys. This is a very ambitious film, right? From visually, cinematically, from a script, very ambitious. What for you, and Derick, you kind of lean into this, but what are the Nolans, okay, both Jonathan and Christopher, what are they wanting us to take away from this movie, in your opinion? I mean, we touch on climate change, we talk on exploration, on love, sacrifice. They're again very very ambitious conspiracy, right? The moon landings were not real. So much, but what do they want us to take away from this movie, in your opinion?
Derick, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very big, very ambitious movie, and I think it is kind of being like, yeah, like I love that when they're going to space and the guy is like very nervous about, I'm forgetting the character's name, but he's nervous about the bald guy, about like just being around in the middle of space and just what that means, and he's like, we're explorers and stuff, and yeah, just kind of.
I love that line. Matthew McConaughey says, some of the best sailmen don't know how to swim.
Right.
Yeah.
If they get knocked off, they're gone. And then he goes into the fact that like we're explorers, and this is our ship.
Right. And this movie, I think it's very all about like kind of ambition and going out there and believing you can do it, and because Matthew McConaughey, like he believes he can go out there and like help save the world and save his kids and all that. When then you have Dr. Brand back on Earth, the Michael Caine one, and he's essentially given up. He's like, Plan A is not going to work. I'm never going to figure it out. I lied to everybody. It's this great, horrible weight I'm living with, and the Earth is going to die. Humanity is going to live on, but it's not going to be an actual continuation of the humanity that we have here. And I think that it's very anti-cynicism. It's very anti, just kind of like giving up and just being like, all right, well, we can salvage it or whatever. It's all about like these great big ambitions. And I think one thing that it's also very clear about to me is that it's confronting this great man myth we have of like, there's these great people that have lived throughout history, and the singular individuals have shaped history, right? And Coop is somebody who does a lot, but he's basically just kind of a tool for, the future humans, to help his daughter, to, helping out all these other people. And to the point where I think, they intentionally, it's not an accident that Matt Damon's character is named Dr. Man. He is this character who is this great man who, in like a action movie from like another director, like a 90s movie, he would be the main character. He'd be this great astronaut who goes up and saves everybody. But he's the coward. He's the villain. This myth of this great man is totally deconstructed. And one thing I love about the casting of Damon is it tricks you, right? You're like, oh, Matt Damon. The audience sees him, and you're like, I didn't know he was in this. Cool. I'm on board. We've heard about this great guy. We see it's Matt Damon. We love Matt Damon. Who doesn't love Matt Damon, right? He's the best. And so you see him, and then, he turns out to be this, like, rat bastard. And you're like, and it makes you feel so betrayed. You're like, how could you do this to me, Matt Damon?
Why, Matt Damon?
So I think Nolan's always really smart about casting. And I think that,
he is.
I love that Matt Damon is a lot of guys, a lot of big names are afraid to play like bad guys or stuff, or they like have to have the same amount of punches in a fight in the Fast and the Furious or whatever. But Damon he's like, he'll show up like in the end of a movie just being the worst person. Like it's happened in like 6 or 7 movies, I feel like.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that take of yours. And especially towards the end where you say, right, about these myths, these legends that we create, and the fallacy that comes with that, right? And how Matt Damon personifies that as Dr. Man. I love that. Thanks, Derick. Danny.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot to pack here. So I want to touch on a couple of things so I think what stood out to me in answering this question is that at the very beginning, when he goes to talk to the school teachers, right? And for whatever reason, this scene stood out to me very vividly, with the fact that, like, hey, your son's test scores says he's going to be a great farmer. And Matthew McConaughey, like, pushing back and saying, like, how do you know that he can't be something more? You're going to give up on him just because of his test scores, right? And having this thing and talking about, like, not having a potential. Coming back to the fact that, like, but, like, his love of what his son could be and whatever he wants it to be is there, which I think is great. And then it comes into Murph's, and Murph bringing up textbook, and then him realizing that the school teachers are idiots because they're saying that the moon landing wasn't like they're speaking. They know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
They know he, at least to a level degree, right? That he at some point was an astronaut or pilot of some kind in NASA or something, because he's got some clout. He knows he's been dealing with kids. They know, it's a small town. This is a dystopian area, which is interesting. So as this scene, I think, to me, like we see Matthew McConaughey like trying to understand how people have gotten so lost, and this idea of like potential and exploring and what he believes his kids can be. Even if, like, he knows, if he he later talks to Tom, and Tom's like, no, I like what you do, Dad, right? And then we come to the end of like how we have like there's like 4 scenes with Murphs and the room, and then we come back to the Tesseract, and how this is like this 4th dimensional thing that like he's only able to talk with Murph at this specific situation, right? This idea, and we ultimately come down to the idea of like that love can transcend everything with gravity. That I think at the end of the day that the Nolans want us to like that things will happen in our lives whether we like it or not. But I think that like if we can find individuals or in our lives that we can love, that we will find those moments better, and that whether they be like, and we don't have the ability to go back and like manipulate them, but
yet.
Yes, touche. But I think that what ultimately what I get is that like people in our lives that we love and that we learn to cherish should be people that we try to connect with, because we don't know how they will impact our lives. And if we know, and I think it's interesting because like this is a time where like, I feel like we're like middle age, we're still, things are still happening in the internet and with technology and things like that where we at now after COVID, like we're in a post-COVID world. And the line with Chelsea and with who I always forget who's in this movie, former Spider-Man,
Topher Grace.
Topher Grace.
Yeah, out of nowhere when he shows up, you're like, "What?"
Oh, yes, I know. I'm always pleasantly surprised. Like you said, I always forget that Matt Damon is Dr. Mann. But like they have a scene where like they're just packing up and leaving, right? And they're just trying to survive. And I think that sometimes like we get caught up in trying to survive. And I think that he's trying to tell us that more people should step out and just try to explore, try something new, be bold, and know that like the people that love you the most are trying to push, like you, whether you were trying to push them or them loving you and maybe having to rekindle something, maybe something you have to do. Anyways, long ethereal thing. And I think, like I said, like we see it early on in that scene in the school, and then we see a little like him not backtracking, but with the scene with talking about love and him trying to be scientific. He's like boxed that feeling, some of those things, except for things because he's dealing with time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we as humans, I think sometimes we get stuck in that, like we're dealing with like, I don't have time, where I have some external pressure that is like causing us to not take a step back and think like, okay, what if?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. I like that. Here are my thoughts. And maybe this is just this last time, and I wrote a couple stuff down, but I love how there is so much focus on the fundamental idea of science, right? And Coop tells Murph, right, you have to record. I wrote it down. You got to record the facts, analyze, get to the how and why, and then present your conclusions, right? So there's all this focus on quantitative data. But to me, this movie at the end of the day is a call to adventure, a call to creativity, a call to be driven by decisions of the heart, and not necessarily to throw out data or anything like that. But how can we incorporate, again, emotion, family relationships, love into these fundamental aspects of science? And it's interesting because the movie focused a lot on people taking this information and giving up, right? Yeah. We were explorers, we were pioneers, we weren't meant to be caretakers, he says, right? And I think the movie's telling us that we ought to be looking for ways that the irrational of humanity's irrationality can offer a path to greater good when led by love and and through feelings of the heart, right? And I think for Nolan, this is post Dark Knight Rises, and maybe this is just top of mind just because we're seeing like movie studios, and I'm thinking The Fall Guy, right? Fall Guy was what in theaters for 2 weeks and 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. It didn't perform the way,
and they took it out,
and they sent it directly to digital.
It's still at the theaters making decent money. Like, it had okay legs, but then they're already like, nope, put it on stream. Yeah. Put it on VOD, Put it on
VOD immediately, right? And I think like this is Nolan's Nolan, like, again, Nolan's really good at like talking about like the industry through his movies, right? You look at The Prestige. The Prestige is just basically a movie, a love letter to cinema, right? How do you incorporate 3-act story through the 3 acts of a magic trick, etc.? But like, this is him, in my opinion, like just saying like, yes, box office numbers are important, but you can't give up on creativity, on something beyond the quantitative data, right? Something, what is driving us? And for him in this story, it's love. For Cooper, for Dr. Brand, right? These decisions that they're making is to look at quantitative data, but how can I incorporate love to push me into take action? And I think, again, in this environment that we live in, where if a movie doesn't perform, doesn't hit 500 million on opening weekend, we have to give up on it. And I'm also like thinking of like Mad Max Furiosa, right? Yeah. Like, it's a 98% chance that we're not going to be getting The Wasteland anymore, or any more Mad Max, because Furiosa didn't perform as strong as they wanted to in the first week and a half or 2 weeks. Yeah. And you're now shutting down a great filmmaker and storyteller from George Miller, and not letting him be able to like be creative, to be driven by love, rather be shut down. Going back to your point in that scene where where Topher Grazer says like they're just packing up, like they're just giving up, and I think for me that's a call that this movie is doing. Like, yeah, let's look at data, but what's driving our decisions? How do we analyze, and how can we incorporate, in this case, love into these decision making?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that having those sometimes, like, I think of, so I was, because I do a lot of content production for a lot of different people. I have to try to stay on top of things and try to understand. And there's like, it's still kind of a big thing. I mean, Mr. Beast started this whole like retention, quote unquote, retention editing of like, let's try to make it can only stay on for like 4 seconds, and we had to cut to something new every 3 seconds, and it's got to be something different that like maybe juxtaposed, or just like that just is like some weird thing that happens or whatever it might be, right? Mm-hmm. And this other YouTuber he was an editor for Logan Paul, who now he's got the editing podcast, which is great. He got hired to because he said like, guys, your editing sucks. Like this whole idea, and like trying to introduce the feelings and the emotions, the other side of it, right? We do need data. We do need, like, obviously there's a game, there's an algorithm has to be played, but at the end of the day, we're just human. We just want to hear stories. We want to be able to connect, and just doing XYZ doesn't mean you are necessarily connecting.
Yeah. Well, you bring up the editing, and I think that's really interesting because I think something that a lot of people picked up on with Oppenheimer is just the pace of that movie and how well edited it was, and it just kept your attention to the point where people have been like, it's a 3-hour trailer, because that's a movie it's 3 hours long. It's just about mostly dudes talking, but it's still like you're just like engaged, and it's never boring. It's always moving at a clip. I'd say I really feel the same way about this one because of that editing style, very trailer-like, very like you're always kind of one character will be talking and then kind of will cut to someone else and they're doing the thing, and I think that's something he maybe learned on Inception because a lot of his films before that they're about like one or two characters in kind of like one place, even like The Prestige, which is like doing different layers and stuff like that. But Inception, it's like especially the end of that movie when they're going down the multiple dream layers, and there's so much like complexity to that, and it's like, okay, someone's doing like Leonardo DiCaprio's on this level with Elliot Page, and then the level above him is like Tom Hardy, and then above him is like the level with the driving, and like how it just keeps cutting back and forth between all those, but it's never like and by the way, this was happening. It's like the thing I think that the South Park guys say, never say this happened and then this happened. It's always this happened, which because this happened. Yeah. So one thing leads into another, and there's a lot of that happening in this movie in Interstellar. So, like one that I really clocked when I was watching this time is it's a great, incredibly edited scene where he's leaving, and he's driving away as he's just said goodbye to Murph, and then as this truck is already pulling away, you start to hear the countdown for the shuttle launching, obviously the way before you see it. So it's already
such a great
right. You're already getting ready for, like, you've already in the mindset. You don't have to like watch him drive away and then like you're already like, oh no, he's gone. Like he's leaving now. And then, with that, the Hans Zimmer music, which by the way, we'll probably get to more, is swelling in that moment, and it's just building and building and building. So then by the time the rocket launches, you're already like completely in it. You're already like, no, don't leave. Like, stay with Murph, So I think that the editing is so well done in this film.
The second one I think on that is when they go visit the first planet and with the ticking.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have the musical undertone. I think the musical undertone through this entire film is, the music alone is phenomenal, but the way they leverage music helps to amplify everything. And I think that one of the best example, I think first time going in space, music completely cuts out, which I appreciate. Sometimes space, it has this like ethereal feel, which they kind of have at this moment, but like they always have music undertone. But space there's nothing. You can't hear anything in space, which I really appreciated. I think it's just a level of like appreciation for what space brings. But when they go to that first planet and there's a ticking, their time is resource. And they introduce it with this slow, and it just, as it grows, as they know danger's approaching and they're having to go, music is getting bigger and it like swells and there's all this other stuff happening. The wonderful moment in that scene, I think, them, one, I appreciate that we don't get like this. I think part of the reason why this film is amazing for what it is because they used a lot of a lot of practical stuff for this. They built some stuff and making it so we're not getting like expansive shots. We're getting close. Unlike The Creator, where they like, let's shoot stuff and then use AI and we're gonna edit the whole thing and then we're gonna add all the stuff after the fact, after we've locked everything down. He went with the route like, what can we do to build things or design. And I freaking love the spaceship entry of that first planet. It is just phenomenal. It's like a ride. You're just like, and again, I think this comes down to the fact that he's like, the co-pilot is telling him like, let's engage. Like we're like, this is crazy essentially that he's coming in hot. And he's like, no, I got to feel the wind. He's like trying to get it. And then he knows what to do, and just again shows how much of a professional pilot he is, and saying, it's like, that's an efficient landing. In the only thing I have with one gripe I have with this one portion is, why did they not freaking have Taurus like backpack these guys to go do the stuff in the first place? I was like, come on, guys, what the heck? I know it's suspense, I get it, it's fine, but I have it's like, how movie should have ended.
Oh, although I will say, when Tars opens up and he's like, he's doing his little you're like, Tars is the best. Like, he's just like literally like the best character. Like, people always love to ding Christopher Nolan. They're like, he can't write people. I'm like, well, he can write robots, because like Tars is the best. But I wanted to bring up something, because you brought up the ticking. Do you know the thing about the ticking, Danny?
I do not know.
Okay,
about the ticking.
Here's the thing.
Good stuff. Go.
The ticking, there's actually a thing for it where every time it ticks, which is about 1 1/4 second, it's a day passing on Earth.
Oh, that makes sense. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it amps you up so much, you're like so anxious, and then when you know that, you're just like, there's another day, like you're wasting so much time.
Okay, so that should have been the question. Is like, how many days? Oh, we know 25 years.
23 years, I think it was.
Yeah, 23 years, 4 months, and like 8 days, I want to say, is what he says.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And no, but I just think, that's the whole scene just epitomizes, or like it showcases the beautiful craft of what this film brings. The music, the cinematography, the desire for a film to have tension, and not releasing the tension right away, right? Because he could have easily, wrote on the first wave where like he is able to eject the whatever water thing from the fuels and catch it on the way down or whatever, which Nolan really does amazing job in this film of like delaying like the tension that is there. I think another great example of that is when he tries to open the door to say bye to Murph, and he can't get in, and then we don't really know why. I know it's a small thing, but then it takes, he has a moment. He goes back the next morning and finds out that it's the desk. We find out visually that it was the desk, and so there's Cooper.
This movie is masterful with setup and payoff. There's so much of that. Yes. Everything that's established in the first act is paid off in the last act. That's like textbook screenwriting. It's great.
We also get setups. I mean, the setups in the whole second act ending with man. I think again, like, hey, let's the Lazarus mission, bringing something back to the dead and finding him, and him is, you've literally raised me from the dead. But not only that, but having him be hopeless and the adversary to the mission, just because he is a coward.
Yeah,
God, the biggest coward.
The biggest.
To the point where he won't even watch him die.
Right.
Like, if you're gonna kill the guy, at least watch.
He's like,
him.
I thought I could do it, but I suck way too much.
I feel like Matt Damon just totally sells that role. I really appreciate Matt Damon.
Yeah, he's great.
He's the best.
He's incredible. I do want to. We
should probably go a little bit longer, just for the record. We're already at 53 minutes, and we got to talk about some scenes and some other stuff. We'll probably go about another 15 minutes, folks. If you're still tuning in, thank you so much. Please stay tuned, because we have a lot of other good stuff happening. But I just want to note for the actual crew here.
You good with that, Derick?
Sorry, you guys froze for a second, so I missed what you guys just said.
That we're gonna go a little bit longer, because we're at an hour.
Oh, hell yeah. Let's keep it going.
Going back to the edit, though, I will say that for me, there's the scene, and obviously Nolan does this a lot, where he's telling a story, he cuts to another story, goes back and forth.
Yes.
We see this a lot in his movies. I think this time around, and it didn't work for me, but it's the cutting back and forth between what's happening with Coop and then going back to the farmhouse with the burning.
Is this the Tesseract? Is this the Tesseract scene?
Yeah, like even like leading up to that, right? But like, I don't mind Murph being in the room and getting prompted by Coop. Rather, it's just like the whole cutting back and forth between Coop and Tom, the family, and we're going back at Topher Grace, right? And all of this back and forth that happens a lot. That to me, there was a point where I was just like, the B story here isn't working for me. You know, the family getting sick, Topher Grace coming in, and I get it that you need it in order to pull Murph into the home, like you said, Derick, right? Most likely, if it was just Murph, she would have already sold the house, right? But like cutting back so much to that B storyline, I was this time watching, I was like, oh, I just want to stay with Murph or with Cooper and what's happening here, and I just stay here, right?
Yeah, so I think part of that is that they needed to, what I know for a fact. I mean, part of it because this guy does a great breakdown. I'll leave a link in the show notes, but he's a professional editor. He worked with who's the guy that did Titanic?
James Cameron.
He worked on James Cameron too. Anyways, they use those only to reintroduce tension, right? Like,
sure,
it's not supposed to be there, so I totally understand why it's there. That seems actually really like the breakdown on that with the present versus the future / the past. We actually get an additional scene that we don't get anywhere else. There's a scene where when he first knocks over the rover or the landing,
the little lunar lander,
the lunar lander. Because in the first part of the movie, she comes in. He's like, "What'd you do with my lander?" And she's like, "It fell." And they talk about the ghost. There's a scene where she's brushing her hair. It happens, and she looks at the bookcase, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Just to think as like a little moment of a nugget to introduce it with that first part. But that whole editing is really awesome.
Yeah, I didn't mind it so much because I feel like it did a good job of like reminding you of the stakes on Earth. Like I feel like if you're out in space the whole time and you don't have a character that you have a strong connection to on Earth, like other than the fact that like we care about the Earth because we live here in real life, we're gonna like lose a little bit of that, just kind of that tension, that desire to see it succeed. And when you have Murph doing that, I think it makes the stakes that much more important. And also I really like the dichotomy of her being like the same age as her dad and realizing that like, oh, like the time they spent there has had this tangible effect. They are like now, this many years behind. I love that. Like he tells her, you might be the same age when he comes back. And it's like, oh no, they are the same. Like I love that. That's how when we are introduced to Jessica Chastain is through that video, and then it cuts, and that's the first time we really go to the Earth perspective. Is when you see her, you see her like from Coop's perspective, click stop on the video, and then you actually are just like seeing her stop. So it goes back from her. So I think that worked for me really well. What didn't work as well for me in the cutting back and forth is it's more of a technical thing. Is the changing aspect ratios. For whatever reason, I can't stand that. It really threw me off because
it's because of IMAX.
Because IMAX. Because so you'll go from like the 4:3 if you're watching at home like 16:9 to the more traditional like kind of letterboxed style where the black bars are on the top and bottom, and it happens a lot. And if it had just been like okay, well all the space scenes are in IMAX and all the scenes on Earth are in like the more traditional format, I would have been okay with that. But even there's like scenes on Earth that are in the IMAX, and there's scenes in space where it's because I think Nolan is one of the best filmmakers to use IMAX. And if you look at his career, he progressively has used IMAX in more and more and more of his of the film, where to the point where Oppenheimer came out, that movie is almost shot entirely in IMAX. Whereas his early films like Batman Begins, there's no IMAX. And this comes at the exact middle point where it's about 50-50. Yeah. So there's so many changing aspect ratios, even scene to scene. Like there's the scene where Matthew McConaughey is like reaching out to Anne Hathaway, and then they're going back and forth between their perspectives, and it's such a powerful moment, but it's shot to aspect ratios, so you're getting kind of whiplash. That's the only thing that bugged me about the kind of cutting back and forth is that I was just like, dude, just pick a lane. I
get that.
Or even just like if you're doing it on the home release, just make everything in the one aspect ratio. Because I mean, you just mentioned James Cameron. He's somebody who pioneered like when he shot Titanic, and I think even Terminator 2, he shot it with like multiple aspect ratios in mind for the theatrical release and also for the at-home release back when full screens were a thing. And because he wasn't taking anything away, actually it was just a different format where there was like more on the top and bottom now of the full screen, and even though to make up for what was lost on the sides. And if you go like watch like behind the scenes stuff, like that's pretty much common practice for any directors, including Nolan, who shoot on IMAX now. Is if you look at the camera lens, it has all these different aspect ratios just drawn onto it, so they can see how it will be on IMAX or this screen or a home screen or your phone, presumably, like however, you know.
No, that's good. That's a good point, and I think because this is like a midpoint in his career of like really leaning into it, it is more drastically and more noticeable this time than in other movies. I want to talk about favorite moments, favorite scenes, and then we can just kind of like leave it open to anything else that comes top of mind. But what is your favorite scene in this? And Danny, why don't you kick us off with that?
Favorite scene or just a scene that I really... Okay, you said favorite scene.
One or two, because I have like two favorite scenes here.
Yeah. Great question. So I think for me, I really enjoy So again, I want to touch on that first Earth landing, or the Earth landing, but the planet landing, like I mentioned, probably has to be my favorite sequence. It's just because it's the first sense of exploration. There's also such a huge risk involved that there's all the editing in it, some of the tension points that happen with trying to get people to come back, coming down, and then honestly, I think Robert's performance when she realizes that like they had made the astronauts that had died had only landed so like just barely ahead of them, right? And so that they missed them and they missed the opportunity or whatever. I think it's such a big revelation, but also it ends all of this with the fact that they had 23 years that they missed or whatever, and with Matthew McConaughey in front of the thing, and he's watching his kids like send a message, and him just like realizing the thing that the dread of what he didn't want to have happen had happened, right? And again, that's why like the fact that they had to wait a whole nother like cycle, and him and Julia, Brand and Cooper's just like kind of discussion / anger point in between before the next swell came. I think just amplifies how the next sequence happened. Why he's so scientific on he's angry at Brand. I don't know. It's just such a beautiful. There's so much. There's exhilaration, like I said, from the entry with the ship. There's the like euphoria of seeing Taurus like be awesome, because we kind of got a glimpse, and then also we get to see what he's capable of, and why he's just like why he's there, and just like why wouldn't we have more of him, in my opinion. And then I think my other scene that I just really appreciate is honestly the end little sequence to the end. There's something. It sucks that like his family's gone. At the end of the day, his family's, but that that Murph understands, loves him still, is happy that things are there. I think the fact that like when he mentions that, named after me, and the nurse scoffs at him, I think is a nice little nod and a moment to like a female scientist, even though Nolan has a struggle with writing females overall, but having that little moment and then having him continue his exploration. Who's to say that he and Brand are not the people that set the basis for how to create the wormhole, or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think those are the scenes. I mean, I don't know if there's more you guys want to talk about there, but those are the ones I think for me. I just also love that he commandeers himself a spaceship with Taurus.
With Taurus. I love that realization, right? That his family is basically gone.
Yeah.
Right. But and this line really stood out to me, like where she says, like, I knew you were gonna come back. Yeah. And he says, how? Because my dad made a promise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's, even though for Cooper, like, his Tom is most likely dead, right? But like, and that Murph has lived her life and has moved on, right? But that satisfaction for him as a father to come to that realization and be like, yes, I kept my promise.
Yeah.
And my daughter knows it.
Yeah.
And knew it all along.
Yeah.
Right, because my dad would made a promise.
Yeah.
Derick, your favorite scenes?
Yeah, I mean, just real fast, like, it's not one of my scenes, but I wanted to add a little bit to what you guys were saying about that last scene, because I do think that it's a really powerful scene. Because he's spending this whole movie, as we've talked about, just like drawn back, trying to get back to Earth because of the love that he has for Murph, and because he made her that promise, and she's literally been waiting her entire life. Like, she's an old lady, she's like old Rose in Titanic by the time he gets back. And he's able to, like, and he kind of expects to, like, when he leaves, he expects to get back and, like, keep raising her. But she's had her whole life. She had, like, we see that she's got a family of like 1 million people all around her. So she's not alone. She's like, she tells him, like, don't be here while I'm dying. So she's had her full life. He doesn't have to feel bad about that. And then he's still compelled by love. He still goes off and ventures into the unknown. It's for a different kind of love. Instead of, a fatherly love, it's a more romantic love for Brant, and he goes off to, like, find her after she's, like, mourning the loss of her other love, but they had this connection. They had that moment where they, like, had that, interdimensional handshake or whatever. So I love that that's the beat the movie ends on. But, for me, I think that the standout scene is the scene where, he's got to dock the ship. Because I think that's one of my favorite scenes in just any movie, honestly. Like, it's so well done. The tension is built up so perfectly through the incredible performances of all three of them. The special effects, he uses a lot of practical stuff. Like we said, there's some invisible, CG stuff like that is really well hidden in there, I think. And then the score, the Hans Zimmer score, that just boom, boom, because it's building and building and building. Yeah. And at first they're, like, chasing Matt Damon, and he's about to, like, steal the ship and get away. And they're like, oh no, he's gonna blow this thing up. He's gonna, like, mess everything up. We've got to stop. And then they're telling him stop, stop, stop. And he's, of course, he thinks he's the main character, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna get on this ship. And he's, like, giving this grand speech, and then just boom, like, in the middle of his speech, he just explodes.
Yeah.
And then everything goes quiet. And even the Hans Zimmer organs just die down for a second. And you're like, oh no, they are screwed. And then Matthew McConaughey is like, I'm going to do some hero stuff right now. And he starts gunning, and then the music comes back, and even more, it's like pounding and pounding and pounding. And you're like, this is impossible. And he's like, it is, but it's necessary. And you're like, that would be such an awful line, but it's so cool somehow. Like, and he just zooms in, and he does this thing. And, like, even, like, Anne Hathaway passes out, like, and she's, like, rad. So, like, this is intense. And, like, the way he's, like, able to, like, just it's so well shot and edited and everything else. And then when he clamps down and he starts to rise up, and the organs are just, like, finally, like, there's a release, the tension stops building. It's like, oh, like, it's literally like the score is rising, the notes are going higher, the thing is getting lifted away from the planet, and you're like, he did it, how did he do it? Like, it's such, like, that's filmmaking, that's the power of movies, is just, like, getting so invested in seeing the coolest thing ever. And so I think that has to take the cake for me if I'm choosing a scene.
I love it. That was one of my favorite scenes. And it starts from the marooning, right? Like, once man leaves,
yes,
right, up to that final docking, right? You said it perfectly, Derick. It's just perfectly paced, the editing, and it builds the tension that I want. And it's what I go to the movies for. So that was definitely That was one of my two. The other one, obviously, I just love the crying scene.
Yeah.
And a couple of reasons. And we often talk about this on our podcast, but like, there is just something powerful for me when that scene obviously ends right after they went to Miller's planet, and it's such a intense scene of the tick-tock, right? Of the waves coming in. What's his face dies there, and like we just see the body laying there, and then we have that time jump, and for me, like it's such a tense scene, and I love it when a movie gets me all riled up, but then brings me down, right? And then lets me as a viewer breathe, kind of sit with my emotions, and in this case, dumps more emotions on me by seeing how they've grown, how they've moved on, how this feeling from Coop to feel like he has missed his kids, them growing up, their life, and just him breaking down. Like I just love the build up to it from Miller's Planet and to here. For me as a viewer, it just gave me that breathing that I needed, but allowed me to then like compose myself through crying, through emotion, and okay, where do we go from here?
What is he gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That scene, it's so powerful, and that was the moment when I've always liked Matthew McConaughey as an actor, but for me he's always just like a hey, that all right guy. Like he was like a kind of cool, fun guy, and that scene was when he got cast in this, I was like, really, McConaughey? Okay, and because this is right in the middle of the McConaissance, you know. And that scene is like mostly him reacting. Like there is some stuff with like Jessica Chastain and Casey Affleck and Timmy on the screen, but it's mostly just like him just like doing the crying stuff. And that was the moment I was like, this dude can act. Like this is Oscar worthy, because like you said, he is finding out how much he missed. Like there's a point in that where he finds out in about 30 seconds that, you know, his son has grown up, gotten married, had a kid, and that kid has died. Like he finds out that all right, and he's like, it's just all on his face. So yeah, like that. I think him and Anne Hathaway, like everyone in this is really good. I gotta say, shout out. I kept forgetting who the actor was. David Gaiasi. I might be pronouncing that name wrong. You know, he's the British guy, the bald guy, the black guy. Yeah. So he's great in this, but everyone's phenomenal in this, and I think like, if there wasn't such a genre bias against sci-fi films, then probably McConaughey and Hathaway would have gotten nominated.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree.
Something I love about that scene is we get all of this, and we see son, we see Donald, and it's not till that last little bit, right? Like you said. It culminates to that of Murph saying, "I didn't want to do this, but it's my right." Am I thinking right? Does Murph end that sequence?
Wait, oh yeah, he's like, "I've never seen you in here before," and she's like, she's like, I've never come in here before. I was just doing something once or something like that.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And then we find out that she's worked, because there's again payoffs. We find out that like, hey, I think. When he first brings the message, you know,
in the truck
back to the farmhouse, like I think she could benefit from being. I've seen her scores or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think she could benefit from my wing, and you know, have that little moment. And then we cut to the whole sequence, and we come back. Like it culminates with that, and then we feel these emotions with Coop, and then we also feel emotion with the daughter, but it transitions into that next little window, which I think is just beautiful.
Yeah.
It really does help us move. It allows us to have reprieve, feel things that they're feeling after such a roller coaster with the crew. I don't know, beautiful. Just this. I think So I'm not. I think as I think about like Oppenheimer to this film. Wait. Did you have another thing?
No. Go ahead.
So, where are you guys' thoughts on Oppenheimer to this film? Because I feel like this film particularly gets possibly Nolan into this realm where he ends up to Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels, honestly, between the two of them that I didn't really notice at first. Like I talked about all the cut editing and how the pacing of these two films feels very similar, and they're both about pushing these scientific boundaries. But I think Oppenheimer similarly deals with the kind of myth of the great man and how Oppenheimer, is this kind of quote unquote great man, but like it kind of deconstructs that because it's like, oh yeah, he did this thing, but also maybe that was the bad thing, and like also probably anybody would have done it, but like he did it, and like it's. I think that Oppenheimer is almost like a mix of Coop and Dr. Mann. He's got like a lot of that like self-aggrandizing of Dr. Mann. He's obviously not as much of a coward, and he is like, there was even a moment in this where he's going into the black hole and he's getting hit by all the like the dust and the particles are flying at him. And that reminded me a lot of the imagery of a lot of the stuff in Oppenheimer when, he'll be thinking about the particles and stuff like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't picked up on that before.
Yeah, no, I obviously I was learning for him to then adapt into Oppenheimer. I think something that, and you said this earlier, Derick, right? A lot of people seem to criticize that, like, oh, this is a sci-fi movie, and then in the end, like it's all about love, right? And people were critical of that aspect when in reality the whole movie was about love. But something that I want more of Nolan is to really hopefully continue to lean more into these emotional beats and more emotion from his stories. Not that Oppenheimer wasn't, right? Because we are deconstructing this character, a man, and everything that he's gone through. And also like that, obviously that powerful scene between Emily Blunt and Cillian Murphy right after he finds out that what's her name has died, and he goes, he goes off, and then Emily Blunt finds him, and she says something along the lines of like, we don't have the luxury to feel bad for you, right?
Yeah,
or something along those lines, right? And like get up and like pick yourself up, right? And I think that's probably my favorite scene in Oppenheimer, because he really does get humbled, and more importantly by his spouse. But I hope that he continues to lean more into these emotional movies. And I know that Interstellar was originally supposed to be a Steven Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
Then the Nolan brothers came in and rewrote the whole thing, and they got full credit, writing credit for it and whatnot. But like, I wonder if had Steven Spielberg continued to make this movie, that whole theme of love would have been more Spielberg, right? Like very, very cheesy, very emotional, a little bit too much. Whereas people feel like, well, it was not enough between the Nolans. But I really, I think that's my wish moving forward for Nolan is to, no, you tested the waters with this, lean more into it, and lean more into like the emotion of a character and deconstructing them, and how that puts them on a path for growth, right?
Yeah, totally.
Well, you have your thoughts, right? Yeah.
I was just waiting to see if Derick wanted to hop in real fast.
No, go ahead.
No, so I think Oppenheimer is I see the parallel of like how he ends up to Oppenheimer, especially with Tenet. I will say I agree with you, Marcel. I think for me, like Tenet, the end, the revelation for what's his bucket to realize that it was
the protagonist
who have the whole like is the reveal, right? For he's the one that like that saves him, or and it's a great reveal. It's also a moment that you're like, I just want more. I want more of this, right? In Oppenheimer, I also feel like the Interstellar and Oppenheimer are like on the same coin and they're just opposite sides of each other, in the sense that like in the thematic sense of like what Nolan's trying to like, what are the messages he's trying, what are the stories that he's trying to tell us, and the lessons we're trying to learn from them, right? With Interstellar, we have this idea of like pioneering and expansion and growth, and this idea of to love and to that there is something to be loved. In Oppenheimer, it's almost like the opposite in the sense that like we're trying to protect. There's still exploration, but there's at such a big a cost. Is it something that we should actually be doing? Right? It goes forward because it's gonna it needed to happen to go there. But again, at the end of the day, it's like, did that thing need to happen? And like, I mean, I think the end sequence of Oppenheimer leaves us on like the opposite end of where this movie leaves us.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know, it's just it's an interesting feel to think of it as like on that end. I will also say that like, I mean, I said it when we first did the review, or like if our little like movie thing that we did where we went and watched it at the Chinese theater, that like that movie, like, I mean, and we now know it's like every 4 seconds it cuts. And it goes through the whole thing, but it's also intercutting to different things. So like there's, we're just like engaging throughout the entire film. It doesn't feel heavy in that aspect. But I do really appreciate that in this film we have the flow. And I appreciate Interstellar more in that aspect than I do Oppenheimer. When it comes to the overall, not editing pacing, because like the pacing in Oppenheimer feels good. But just overall feel of the film at the end of the day, I thoroughly enjoyed more watching this time with Interstellar, thinking about, I don't know, Oppenheimer. But just, I don't know, pretty great, pretty awesome to see this filmmaker and seeing this point in his filmmaking career, and be able to like have this other like amazing movie that was made by him to like compare it to 10 years later.
I like that. You guys, this has been a great conversation.
This has been a great conversation.
I think my last question is, 10 years later, does this hold up? Yes or no? And we all agree that it?
Yes.
I love this movie. I'm glad that we had this conversation. It's just, I'm excited to continue to revisit this.
Yeah, I am too.
Over the next decade, and just continue to see how it holds up. And I think I mentioned this to you. I think this is my first time watching a Nolan movie post Oppenheimer, right? And just to see his growth, the way he's tackling themes and structure of his screenplays, it's just, maybe we'll do a whole season on just on
I will be watching this movie way more.
Yeah. It's one that it's a one that's in the rotation. I was like looking at my letterbox after I checked it off, and I was like, I think I've watched this movie usually about once a year, honestly, at least.
Nice. Yeah, I need to watch it more.
I think I might. Yeah, I do too. I actually think this might be tied with Prestige being my top Nolan film.
Oh wow.
Prestige is that high for you?
I love
The Prestige is so good.
It's a near perfect movie.
I will. I don't know if it tops it. I think I have to watch more because I've watched Prestige a lot, but and because it's a nod to filmmaking, like in the storytelling, and like I just love and that the whole cast. We'll get to it one day in the month. I freaking absolutely love that film. Anyways, Derick, you got any last things you wanted to mention?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention is that, obviously Nolan is a filmmaker that is obsessed with time. So many of his movies are about time, or they have time as a really integral part of it, even if they're not specifically about time, like Oppenheimer or Dunkirk or something. They still use the time as an interesting storytelling tactic. And this is one that feels like, other than maybe Inception, the one that is the most literal and important in the film, where it's all about the time that we spend, and making sure that we spend that time wisely and stuff like that, and time as a resource. And it also has essentially kind of time travel, at the end, where he's in the Tesseract and stuff like that. And I love a movie with a good closed time loop. I love, that's my favorite kind of time travel, is when there's a closed loop and it's this thing that happened at the beginning, it was actually himself at the end. He caused it. It's time travel, but it's that really cool kind of time travel where he's causing it. It's a movie about destiny, but it's a movie where also at the end it's revealed that the destiny was created by you. You know, Cooper was always going to go out. He was never going to listen to that message, stay, but he was the one who gave himself the coordinates. And I think that's such a cool thing whenever media is able to pull that off in a really satisfying way.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode about Interstellar. So if you did, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget to leave us a review. It really helps us get discovered. And thank you, Derick, for joining us. He's from the Underrated Movies podcast. So if you haven't checked him out, please go and follow him there. Any last comments from you, Derick?
Yeah, thank you, for having me, guys. If anybody out there, like you said, check out Underrated Movie Podcast. You guys have both been on. It's a lot of fun. I do that show. If anybody is around Comic-Con, I'm going to be having a panel there. I can't say any details about it yet, but definitely if you're at Comic-Con, find me, come check out my panel. I'd love to see you all there.
That's awesome. That's super exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Excited for it.
Please do go check out Underrated Movie Podcast. They've got some great content, great guests, and just awesome themes all around. But lastly, we want to hear from you listeners. What did you think of Interstellar? What did we miss? You can follow us on social at Real Chums, or feel free to email us at your@realchums.com. You can find me, Marcel, on Twitter at MarCtrosity.
Derick, where can they find you?
Underrated Movie Podcast everywhere.
And then you can find me at Rubio_TV. Join us next week as we discuss X-Men Days of Future Past for our rewatch.
This came out 10 years ago again. And I think it's a great lead up to Deadpool and Wolverine. So should be a good rewatch.
And another time travel movie, just like this one.
And another, you're right. Time travel movie. 2014.
Yeah.
Something about time travel. And we did last week. We did Edge of Tomorrow, where it's a time loop.
Yeah, time loop.
There you go.
2014.
Talk about time loops and time weird stuff.
We just made that connection. All right.
Thank you, Jerry. See you guys in the next one.
Later.
Bye.